Hey everyone. So I've been gone a long time. I think the last video that I uploaded to this channel was more than a month ago, I think, at this point. I was out sick. I got a pretty bad flu. I don't know if I got the C word or whatever. The 19. Definitely was not an easy 2 weeks. It got me really bad. That last video, if you got a chance to look at that last video, you can probably tell my voice kind of gave out in a couple instances. I was struggling to kind of, generate enough saliva. So it was the day after I uploaded that video. I think that very night, like I started getting a bad fever. It was horrible. I can talk now. I actually went with like 2 or 3 days where I legitimately could not talk. So that's definitely something that I'm glad to be over. Then I don't know what happened. I got like some, what do you call that? Brain fog for like a week additional, where, I was starting to feel a little bit better physically, but just mentally, I was just so drained. It was horrible. But enough of that. Wanted to make a video because if you are in the know, you are in this guitarist world. Not sure how many of my subscribers are guitarists or just general producers, but if you probably have seen the news somewhere around YouTube or your social media. Quad Cortex OS 3.0 just dropped today as I'm recording this, July 31st. You're probably going to see this maybe the day after or a couple days after, depending on when I upload this, but it is officially here. Plugin support is finally here. 3.0 is super exciting, and you might be asking yourself, why am I talking about CorOS? Well, that's because I bought a Quad Cortex. So this has been a purchase that I wanted to make for quite a while. Over a year at this point. As many of you probably already know, I'm mainly a guitar player. I've been playing for around 15 years or so. So I have had digital platforms in the past. I was a Headrush guy for like probably 5 or 6 years. Then I switched back to kind of more analog pedals, and the amp I was having at that moment was the Universal Audio 65 Dream. Really good pedal, but I just wanted to kind of have a switch. I still have that in that closet over there. I just wanted to go back into kind of like all-in-one solutions. And for me, my research, my workflow, the Quad Cortex was the way to go. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about today about using something like a modeler in the studio. So I go over a lot of plugins on this channel when I do the little like mix template things. When I talk about a lot of different tools, I mix in the box. I don't have analog gear. I guess except for this now, technically digital, analog, whatever you want to look at it. I have amps and things like that. I just do things in the box because noise, just a lot more versatility and things like that. So I wanted to have a conversation about the Quad Cortex in general and how I think it can really help you in your studio workflow if you're a guitarist or a bassist or you just have a Quad Cortex in general. I think it's a really worthy tool, more so than the other modelers for different reasons that we can kind of get into in other moments. But the Quad Cortex, if you're a producer, and why would you get something like this? In my case, I also play live a lot at my church and everything. I play almost weekly. But if you're in a producer, you don't really gig out. Is something like the Quad Cortex a worthy addition for your home studio or just your studio in general? So let's talk about that. So one of the very first things that kind of stands out to me personally, and this is coming from someone that has a good computer, right? I've mentioned this before. I have a Mac Studio, the M1 Max variant. So it's kind of like the first M1 or Mac Studios. It's a very capable, it's a very powerful machine. I have no issues with it. But even in with a machine as powerful as this, it has 32 gigabytes of RAM. I have found myself in sessions where they are very large and they take up a lot of space, and you have loads and loads and loads and loads of plugins, and plugins specifically like, for example, the neural DSP plugins, which is where I mostly live. I have a couple of the plugins in their kind of PC plugins. I have the Parallax for the bass. I have the Archetype Nolly. I'm planning on getting the Matteo Sasato because they are giving away a free plugin to CorOS users. I also have the Amplitude 5. So these are all very, very intense plugins. They eat up a lot of CPU, more so than your, compressors and EQs and things like that. You can stack a lot of those into a session, and after a certain while, things like reverbs are a little bit denser and more CPU hungry, but in general, you maybe don't need as many of those in a session as you do, for example, guitars. I myself am a person that I track multiple guitars. I have layers and layers of guitars. The last session I did for a song, I had, I think, like 5 rhythm guitars and like 3 or 4 lead guitars. So if I'm running Archetype Nolly in every single one of those, that's gonna start eating away at CPU, and Amplitude even more so. I found it has a lot more emulation. It's a much more complete plugin where you can have a lot more things inside the plugin itself. And all of that costs CPU. That's not free. So you do need to kind of take things like that into consideration. Something like CPU usage, where having the ability to have a good studio quality tone here with directly from the Quad Cortex, and all my DAW sees, in my case Logic, all it sees is audio files, is going to be a lot less taxing on the CPU. And then all I have to do is process that signal, as it's coming into the amp. Obviously, this brings up the issue of like the DIs and things like that. Doing it in the box, you do have the added flexibility of keeping the DI. Something like the Quad Cortex, and why I believe it's great for the studio, is because of all the I/O. So this thing is like crazy powerful. It has 2 inputs, more outputs than you probably realistically need in most scenarios. You can have the XLRs in stereo linked. You can have them outputting different things. You can use the sends and returns. So you can have the DI, and you can like record with a completed guitar tone and then keep the DI in case you want to do reamping. We'll touch a little bit about the kind of drawbacks of that a little bit later. But you can have a perfectly good done guitar tone at the source. You receive it in the DAW and you just keep it there. And it's going to help a lot more with your session running a lot smoother. Your computer, not running into overheating issues and things like that, because other instruments like MIDI instruments will not be as forgiving. And even I have found myself just bouncing out once the session starts getting really large with a lot of layers and different things. I find myself bouncing and printing a lot of stuff just to try to get back a little bit of that CPU. One last thing on this point before we move on to point number 2 is something like the Quad Cortex is more capture based, although most modelers are kind of moving into that sphere. Now, even Headrush, they have like a sort of capture, if I remember correctly, with the Headrush Prime. You can still have that flexibility of, a plugin will probably provide you with a lot of really boutique amps or things like that. You can still have that with something like the Quad Cortex, where I can just download someone that if I absolutely want to have that super vintage amp, that 60s Vox, a Korg era Vox, and I really wanted that particular amp, that particular sheen in my guitar, I can just either buy a preset. A lot of people do them for free and they just upload the captures, but if you maybe pay for them, you'll probably get a little bit better quality, people that know how to capture adequately, and with, maybe they'll run it through specific preamps and things like that, which will just kind of enhance the sound. And you can have that virtual snapshot of the amp, and that will elevate your productions in a way that plugins don't always provide, because plugins will sometimes just have the set amp or amps, and you're kind of just stuck with those. But having them in the Quad Cortex, for example, you can have them there, you can base your tone around that, and then you can capture that essentially how you're capturing a mic'd up amp. So this next one is a little bit more niche and it's more specific to the Quad Cortex. This is a video about the Quad Cortex, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention something very specific about it because so far we kind of just talked about, I guess, more modelers in general. Um, and that's using a specific tool inside the Quad Cortex, like, for example, the doubler. So if you know anything about guitars and guitar tone, the best way, this is very subjective, but the best way to kind of get a very wide guitar sound and get that like super deep, super detailed guitar sound that is specifically in rock music that we use so much, you need to double track the guitars. You have to you have a take and you pan that to the left, either a hard pan or partially to the side. And then you make another take and you try to get that as exact as possible, and then you pan that to the right. Obviously, even if you do it perfectly, there is going to be minute details that are different, slight timing that's going to be different, and that's our ears are going to pick up on that, and that's going to give you that really nice stereo guitar sound. You don't always have that option. I myself, I've been a guitarist for 15 years, and even I struggle with this sometimes. We're getting that take perfect in time. That was a lot of perfects. Getting them in time 100% is a challenge. And sometimes, you'll mess up a take right at the end. That can be very frustrating. And although the preferred method is still going to be a legitimate double track, by using something like the new doubler that's available in the CorOS 3.0, you can get a very convincing double tone, even using things like stereo amps. So the left and right signal is a different signal. So essentially, having them perfectly in time, but with different amp sounds, is going to give you a very convincing stereo wide guitar tone with just the one recording, which is going to be a lot easier to keep that in time and align that in time versus having multiple takes across multiple panning solutions. So that is a way where you can speed up your workflow a little bit. Is it going to be preferred? Well, 100%, maybe not. It could be good enough. And in the context of a mix, sometimes, you're rarely going to maybe notice a difference because all you're looking for is the perception of that stereo image, not 100% the reality of having two double track guitars. Another thing is I sometimes work with things that are sent to me. And the guitarist had a mono signal. They didn't record another. So I can either go to that artist and say, hey, I need you to record a stereo signal. So re-record that again, go back in the studio. If they paid to record that in a professional studio, maybe they don't have the setting for it. That's more money that they have to waste. That's more money that, let's be honest, they're not going to pay you. And if you then take it upon yourself, like, okay, like I'll learn the song and I'll play the other track, again, that's more time, that's more money wasted. And power isn't free, DAWs aren't free, internet isn't free. So the quicker that you can get from A to B, even if it's not the ideal solution, if it sounds good, the golden rule, it is good. And if it sounds nice and wide and everything's in time, and I can do that with a single device where I can run the signal that was sent to me into the Quad Cortex, I can double it and then send it out stereo, then at the end of the day, I did what I had to do to get the product into the artist's hands and just get that up and running. So, final point here. So, one of the things that for me has helped a lot is the option paralysis. So, we've all been there. We've seen the meme where, you're 3 days trying to find the perfect snare sample or the perfect guitar amp and the perfect pedal choice and what have you. And at the end of the day, you keep changing it and you change it and you change it. And then you use the 5150, but then you use the 65 anniversary edition, and then you change the cam, and then you move the mic just 2 pixels to the right because that's giving a slightly warmer tone and that's going to fit better in the mix. And all these options are great. don't get me wrong, like I do appreciate having those options, but there is something to be said where way back when you had to get it right at the source. There wasn't infinite options in terms of guitar cabs and mics and placements and rooms and amps. So you had to get the tone that you needed right at the source. Obviously, you can always reamp after the fact, and yeah, that's definitely valid, but that is a big effort. Reamping is no joke. It requires specialized equipment for the most part. If you want to get a good reamping, sure, you can always just use the output and go into another amp. That might not always translate well and it can, produce phase issues and a bunch of other things. So having a completed guitar tone here where I don't have to, fiddle around with it. Obviously, I can fiddle around with it there, but it's much less options. I don't have the ability to just download an infinite amount of other things and just keep adding and adding and changing and changing. Technically, again, something like the Quad Cortex, you can keep downloading things, yes, but in general, you're kind of limited to what you have there, and you're more incentivized to have a completed guitar tone um, done, and then you send it out to the DAW, and then you work with it from there. You don't change the cabs after the fact. Um, and that's going to help your workflow. That's going to help you make better decisions, faster decisions, because, like we mentioned earlier, all of that stuff back there, that wasn't free. So you want to be as quick as you can when you're working on these things. And having a completed guitar tone that you can just go to it like that quickly, you have a preset up and running, and you're just running it and you're gunning it. That is a lot to be said with that, where you can just get a much better workflow, a much better product at the end, because you have to learn how to mix and not depend on, you know, what this other amp will sound like and what this other amp will sound like, because you're getting a completed guitar sound and not just a DI. You can more focus on what's actually important and getting things to fit in the mix and the context of the mix, rather than just changing it 3 days later to fit the mix better. So there you go. 3 little reasons why something like the Quad Cortex could be something that is useful in your studio. Am I saying go buy a Quad Cortex or a Kemper or the Fractal stuff? No, I mean, if you can afford it, sure, go out and buy them. Go buy all of them and then rub it in my face. Why don't you? um, but, what I'm trying to get at here, and what I hope is coming across in this video, is this is a tool. And the same as with plugins, the same as with the mic that I'm talking into, the phone that I'm recording on. They're all tools, and they're tools that we need to learn how to use in order to get the best out of them. I have a bunch of tools here in my house. I have hammers and drills, wrenches and things like that. Am I going to build a house anytime soon? Probably not, because I don't know how to use those tools in that context. I can fix certain things on a car. I can make acoustic panels or whatever, but I can't maybe use them to the extent of their ability. So if anything, this tool, I want to try to use it to the extent of its ability. Same with my DAW, same with everything that I purchase. I try to get the most out of it, really learn how to use it, instead of just, going down that rabbit hole of just buying and buying and buying. So that's going to do it for me. Just 3 little tips or things that I wanted to talk about. I am going to make more QC content in the future. I'm very, very excited about this purchase. It's been a long time coming. I've been really enjoying it. I want to, make more content around it. Not make the entire channel around it maybe, but just talk a little bit about it in the producing world, in the CCM music world. Just kind of talk about how the Quad Cortex is a useful tool in that regard. So if you want to check out any of my other videos, I'll link them around here, or they'll probably be appearing at some point in the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.